Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take the stack of sources you provide and distill the most crucial, fascinating knowledge, giving you a complete understanding in record time. For today, we're diving deep into the American landscape right after World War II, so the era after 1945.
Right.
It's this period that's often romanticized, but it was really defined by this dramatic tension. You had this incredible economic prosperity leading to, well, cultural standardization, a kind of prescriptive American ideal.
And that ideal was immediately met with these rebellious counterforces.
Exactly. We're tracking that story of conformity versus counterculture. Our mission today is to really unpack these twin forces that, went on to shape modern American identity.
And to start, we have to talk about the battlefield itself. Mass culture.
Okay, so define that for us. What is mass culture in this context?
It's the engine of the whole period. We define it as the widespread sharing of standardized ideas, behaviors, and lifestyles across a huge population.
So homogenization.
Total homogenization. The idea that millions of Americans were reading the same magazines, watching the same shows, and dreaming the same dream. It was powerful, but it definitely wasn't organic.
Okay, let's unpack that engine.
Yeah.
You mentioned prosperity, but how does having more money translate directly into uniformity? What were the core drivers?
Well, the foundation was really a perfect storm of economic stability and this radical new urban planning. Suburbanization.
The suburbs, right?
The GI Bill, massive government investment. It all created this rapidly expanding middle class that was suddenly flush with disposable income.
Like at the capital.
They had the capital, and the suburban developments gave them the standardized location. Think of the Leave-It towns. Identical homes, identical lawns.
Identical expectations.
Identical expectations for what a successful family life looked like. It all centered on home ownership, the nuclear family, and, this is crucial, massive consumerism.
But money alone doesn't enforce, moral standards.
Right.
I'm struck by how the sources tie this economic shift directly to political pressure.
Oh, absolutely.
We can't really talk about conformity without talking about fear.
You can't. The political environment under McCarthyism played the role of cultural enforcer. The intense fear of communism during the Cold War meant that any deviation from the norm was extremely dangerous.
So conformity wasn't just about fitting in.
It became a patriotic necessity. The mechanism was simple. If your behavior was deemed un-American, maybe your music was too strange, your clothes too rebellious.
Or your family didn't look right.
Exactly. You could be investigated. And the penalty wasn't just social awkwardness. It could mean losing your job, being ostracized. You could be labeled an enemy of the state.
Wow. So conformity was literally the price of security.
It was the price of security.
That is a fascinating pivot point. And that mandated ideal, it had to be broadcast somehow. This is where television becomes essential. The numbers are staggering. By the late 1950s, nearly 90% of U.S. households owned a TV.
And you have to grasp what the media landscape was like then. It wasn't like today with streaming and hundreds of channels.
No fragmentation.
None. You had 3 major networks. That's it. So nearly all American families were watching the exact same programming at the exact same time.
Creating a common cultural language overnight.
And standardizing norms from coast to coast with just unprecedented speed.
And what was that cultural language saying? It was the idealized suburban sitcom. These shows were less like entertainment and more like a manual for life.
That's a great way to put it.
I'm thinking of shows like Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best.
Those were masterful pieces of cultural engineering. They consistently reinforced a very specific hierarchy.
The working dad, the housewife mom.
Right. The benevolent but emotionally distant father, the cheerful and financially dependent housewife, and, obedient white middle-class kids. It showed you, the viewer, exactly what was expected of you to be a good citizen.
And that uniform ideal was propped up by a radical shift in advertising and consumerism.
That shift is fundamental to the entire post-war economy. Pre-war ads were about function, durability. You bought a product because you needed it.
To survive the Depression or win the war.
Right. Post-war advertising shifted completely to psychological gratification, emotional appeals.
Products became symbols.
Tokens of identity. You didn't just buy a car for transport. You bought the newest model to signal your status, to show you belonged. You bought the latest appliance to fulfill your role as the ideal American homemaker.
And behind all that was the technology of debt. the rise of the credit card.
Which supported all of it, this debt-financed consumption. So conformity wasn't just social, it was financially binding. You had to keep consuming to sustain the whole system.
So the system was perfectly engineered. Political fear demanded social conformity. The economy financed material conformity.
And television broadcast the blueprint. It looked monolithic.
But, human nature hates a vacuum. When cultural control is that total, resistance has to emerge. So where did the counterforces first break through?
What's so fascinating is how immediate that pushback was. It didn't come from political parties. It came from the fringes, from art and literature.
The Beat movement.
We have to start with the Beats. They rejected the entire thing, the materialism, the suburbs, the 9-to-5 grind, all of it.
They were looking for authenticity in a world built on the superficial. You see it perfectly in Jack Kerouac's On the Road.
Yes, that spontaneity, the movement, that stream of consciousness style. It was a complete break from traditional narrative, mirroring their rejection of traditional society.
And there's Allen Ginsberg.
Yeah.
His poetry, especially Howl, was like a direct missile aimed at mainstream values.
It really was. He was critiquing capitalism, conformity, militarism. He wasn't just observing the counterculture. He was, in a way, writing its manifesto.
And he hugely influenced the movements of the 1960s.
Hugely. And this critique of phoniness even managed to get into the mainstream. The sources point to J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye.
Holden Caulfield.
Holden Caulfield. His voice was so visceral and relatable for young people. He just keeps denouncing the superficiality, the phoniness of the adult world.
It wasn't overtly political, but it captured that feeling so many kids must have had.
That the perfect American life they were supposed to inherit was, well, an emotional sham.
So if the Beats were fighting in print, the fight for youth identity was being waged through music.
Rock and roll.
Rock and roll. It managed to bridge mass culture and counterculture, which is exactly why it terrified parents and conservatives. You see that tension perfectly in two huge figures. First, Chuck Berry.
A true pioneer.
A black musician blending R&B with this mainstream appeal. His genius was in the lyrics. They were about youth freedom, cars, social identity, anthems for teenagers.
And then you have Elvis Presley,
who took that sound to the massive white audience.
And his performance style, the movement, the overt sexuality. It was a direct challenge to the very buttoned-up conservative norms of the day.
It was revolutionary. It pushed this music into every American living room, whether parents liked it or not.
It was a cultural force just eroding that standardized, restricted idea of how you were supposed to act.
But the challenge wasn't just cultural. It was also intellectual. Economists and social thinkers started to attack the whole consumer engine.
Right, that's where you get someone like John Kenneth Galbraith. His work, especially The Affluent Society, was this damning critique of corporate influence in advertising.
What was his core argument?
His thesis was that post-war America, for all its wealth, was focusing its resources on manufactured private desires.
Like tail fins on cars.
Exactly. Tail fins on cars while neglecting public needs like education and infrastructure. He argued the system was just designed to convince people to want things they never knew they needed.
All to keep the wheels of conformity turning.
It was a direct intellectual attack on the engine we were just talking about.
And finally, we have to look at the deepest challenge to standardized norms, which wasn't about consumption or art, but about identity and civil rights.
Absolutely. The Mattachine Society is a vital example here. One of the earliest LGBTQ plus rights groups in the country, founded in the early 1950s.
In that climate, that's incredible.
In that climate. This was an organized, focused confrontation with the most restrictive social norms of the era. Their mission was revolutionary.
Just to exist was revolutionary.
Just to exist. They wanted to unify and support marginalized communities, challenge the laws that criminalize same-sex conduct. It was early civil liberties activism in a culture where conformity meant that one specific nuclear family,
The Leave It to Beaver family.
you leave it to Beaver family. The mere existence of the Mattachine Society was a direct threat to that prescribed homogeneity. They demanded visibility in an environment designed to erase them.
So if we step back and synthesize all this, what we really see is this incredible, almost simultaneous push and pull.
Exactly. You have this culture being homogenized, reinforced by the suburban ideal you see on those 3 TV networks.
And at the very same time, you have this powerful counter-demand for authenticity, for intellectual honesty, for civil rights.
Championed by everyone from Ginsberg and Kerouac to Chuck Berry and the Mattachine Society.
And understanding that dynamic, where prosperity was so tied to cultural constraint, is crucial. It shows that the seeds of the 60s, all that massive social upheaval,
They weren't planted later.
they were already growing fiercely right beneath the tidy lawns of the 1950s suburbs. The challenge always starts immediately.
And that leads us to our final thought for you to mull over. If the conformity of the 1950s was standardized by just 3 TV networks and these idealized sitcoms, what contemporary media forms? Social media algorithms, streaming platforms, targeted ads. What's standardizing our norms and maybe subtly demanding conformity from you today?
A truly powerful question to reflect on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into post-war American mass culture and its immediate powerful counterforces. We hope you feel significantly more well-informed.